Welcome to UO Today. I'm Steve Shankman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest is Ben Saunders, an Associate Professor in the Department of English. Ben Saunders earned his BA at the University of East Anglia. He earned a master's degree at Cambridge and a PhD at Duke. He came to Oregon in 2000. He specializes in the poetry and drama of the English Renaissance and in the study of sexuality. His other interests include poetry, the history of pornography, the relationship of violence to the sacred, and Anglo-American popular music. He is the co-editor of the book Rock Over the Edge, Transformations in Popular Music Culture, published in 2002. And he has recently published Desiring Done, Poetry, Sexuality, and Interpretation, published by Harvard University Press in 2006. Ben, welcome back to the show. It's been a while.
Thanks for having me.
And
it's nice to be here.
When did you first start desiring done?
Oh, it's probably got something to do with my mother.
Uh-huh.
She recites poetry from memory.
Uh-huh. Including done.
Including done.
Uh-huh.
Then in high school, Donne was one of we were still calling them the metaphysical poets at that point, and Donne was one of that group of 17th century poets that I studied in high school. And I think it was the combination of difficulty and eroticism that really worked for me.
So from a very early age.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Proustian. So your mother started. You think your mother was
yes,
reciting?
Yes, it's all her
Done.
fault.
It is her fault. Can you? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but some of our listeners may not know Donne. You have a couple of lines for us by heart that you can give us that are particularly powerful for you.
For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love is the
excellent
opening line of the canonization, and it does the kinds of things that people associate with him and his work.
Yeah.
It's a buttonholing gesture. Many of his poems begin in that kind of way. Busy old fool, unruly son, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? C.S. Lewis once said that no poet goes for us in the way that Donne goes for us. It's an aggressive gesture that usually begins quite a lot of the poems. And then the poems themselves, they are an extraordinary variety of materials. There's not one single philosophy or attitude towards love or religion in his work, but he's most well known both for his love poetry, his amatory verse on the one hand, and for his religious verse on the other.
So let's just do a little explication de texte here for our audience. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. You want to just say something about why those lines are particularly paradoxical and powerful?
Well, I think one of the reasons we have become so used to living in a culture where primary sexual relationships are understood to be I suppose in some ways I think this is almost a destructive thing. I think people nowadays are trained to think of their primary relationships as the place where one finds compensation and reward for all the minor and banal daily injuries to one's narcissism that one experiences just moving through life as an ordinary human being, so that you're not as successful in your career as you want to be, or you're not earning as much money as you want to, or you're not as tall as you want to be, or you're not as young as you want to be. But your partner is supposed to love you and compensate for these various deficiencies. That idea of the elevation of the private and domestic sphere above the worldly, and also as a kind of compensation for worldly loss or insufficiency, I think is a standard feature of the sort of the rhetoric of love in the contemporary West, and it has both positive and negative aspects as a result. For Donne, it's an original idea. I think there's something when teaching Donne, I have to get back to that. I have to ask students to sort of imaginatively reconstruct a period where marriage is by and large a a contract between dynastic families, if you're aristocratic or middle class, and usually decided by parents when the children are not even of age or are very young. The notion of marriage for love is a fairly revolutionary notion. Done notoriously threw away a secular career, a good job in the government, marrying the wrong person at the wrong time. And that poem, For God's Sake, Hold Your Tongue and Let Me Love, and then it continues elaborating upon the alas, alas, who's injured by my love. It's an assertion of the right to risk everything for the glory of an idealized romantic relationship. We're used to that now, but I think for him it was a genuinely radical statement.
Right, so for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love sort of undoes the whole idea of godly love as being somehow not erotic.
Well, his
love.
Relationship to one of the more notorious aspects of the writing is that he will speak of what we call earthly love or secular love or sexual love in religious tones or with the religious vocabulary, and that he will speak of religious desire in a sexual vocabulary. So equally famously, there is batter my heart, three-personed God, which ends, I shall ne'er be chaste unless you ravish me. A notorious and shocking, still to some people's ears, invocation of the desire to be raped by God, the desire to know God in such a way that kind of I mean, the words rapture and the words rape have the same root. He is very aware of those kinds of connections, and that's the level at which he will express his sacred desire in those powerful earthly terms. So he mixes these things up. And for some people, at his most imaginative in writing the poetry of earthly love, he was imagining something like a new earthly religion, almost a sort of, there are people, William Empson, for example, has read him as a kind of proto-Laurentian figure, something like D.H. Lawrence, way before D.H. Lawrence, advocating human love as the highest human experience, as a sacred experience.
Now I'd like to read for our viewers a quote from the jacket of your book, if you want to.
Sure.
If your modesty can deal with this.
I'll struggle to pretend to be sufficiently modest.
Witty, erudite, theoretically engaged, but intensely readable. This study takes into account recent developments in the fields of historicism, feminism, queer theory, and postmodern psychoanalysis, while offering dazzling close readings of many of Donne's most famous poems. So my question is this the kind of response you desired for your book?
Oh, well, I suppose so, very much so. Having said that, I was thinking about it a little earlier, and there are many things about knowing that you would be asking me about this. And the book is in some ways a gesture towards the kind of criticism that I would like to see written. I'm not sure if I necessarily have the skill or the talent to write about Donne in the way that I would like to see people writing about Donne. And what the book is an argument for in the end is the book was written in reaction to the political turn that has been taken in much, the political and the historicist turn that has been taken in much literary criticism over the last 20 or 30 years. And I am not, by the way, hostile to political criticism. I was trained within those paradigms, and I've learned a great deal from them. But I had become frustrated by what seemed to me the idea that the work of art must always be judged. The success or failure of the work of art in particular must always be judged in terms of its relative political conservatism or radicality. And that what I was wanting to get back to, or maybe suggest that we've never fully confronted, is that there are some kinds of artistic materials, that there are some artists who are driven to pursue the most difficult human questions. That's what makes the art interesting. Artists are drawn to hot-button issues. And the idea that that somehow we have lost sight of that in our determination to judge the work according to whether we think it's going to produce the right ethical or political response. I think that an awful lot of I think to always measure art in terms of the ethical register or the political register is to fail to recognize that it's the tension between right and wrong, good and bad, that which the desire for good and the desire for selfish and ego-driven desire, that these sorts of tensions are the stuff of some of the most exciting human art.
Mm-hmm. So you might even say in your period in the 17th century, earlier in the period, there was more flexibility in that regard, and maybe by the end, or with Milton, suddenly you get the political and being very, because I don't think Milton does write about these kind of things, whereas Donne.
Well, I think, you know,
or maybe he does despite himself. But
yes, Paradise Lost, I think, despite Milton's best intentions, becomes a glorious love story. But there is really what I'm talking about is the challenge of producing a criticism which is not so institutionally bound that it cannot respond to put it very bluntly, when you read someone like Donne and are asked to respond to it, what you're being asked to respond to are questions about, for example, what turns you on. You're being asked to think about what arouses you. You're being asked to think about what you find an appropriate or inappropriate vocabulary or register or use of desire. You're being asked to think about what kind of tones in which it is appropriate to address God. These are very powerful questions that I think, you know, the question of what one finds, the difference between whether one finds something sexy or sexist, libertine or libertary, these are not easy things to talk about in any circumstance, but certainly not in the context of a classroom. People don't want to share how they feel about what turns them on. And I think that really good criticism always reveals as much about the person doing the act of analysis as it does about the art object, and that's why it's difficult to do. That's why I'm not sure if this book always does what I would really like it to do, because I think you have to, when confronting an artist as exciting and as brave as Donne, you have to be willing to reveal something of yourself. You have to be willing to chance yourself. And that can look, in certain institutional contexts, that can, one risks appearing, amongst other things, very self-indulgent. But I, you know, and the people who don't like Donne, the people who find him artistically repellent, find him self-indulgent.
But isn't it also to risk, often in the current environment, not getting your book published? And so I was going to ask you, were you actually concerned that you know, if it falls into the hands of the wrong reader, if it falls into the hands of a Puritan political, you know, very, very rigidly politically correct readers, no charm and brilliance or anything is going to be able to penetrate the ideological armor. So I was wondering if you were concerned, or whether you felt you could write interestingly enough to sort of get people sort of to loosen up from their sort of hardened positions. I
was very concerned about you know, finding a publisher for numerous reasons. I think that one of the I'm one of those people. I'm one of these very lucky people who gets to what I do for. I love what I do for a living, and I think there are maybe more people out there who really love what they do for a living than you know. But there are many people who don't, and it's a position of extraordinary privilege. Eve Sedgwick once said that she thought one of the reasons that academics experienced a certain degree of hostility from the world beyond the academy was because that this is a profession where one gets to wear one's love of one's work on one's sleeve. And I think that in recent years that might have become more difficult. When people are worried about a shrinking job market and the challenge of producing a certain kind of work in order to try and keep these jobs. The climate is one of fear for a lot of people, and it doesn't seem to me that interesting intellectual work is generally produced in a climate of fear and anxiety. There came a point in this process, though. I think what saved me from the potentially inhibiting experience of the crippling experience of a kind of career anxiety or whatever, was that I would be doing this on the weekends, even if there wasn't a career structure attached to it. And when I started to write this book, I was writing a book that I wanted to read. I had been reading arguments about Donne and about criticism in general, and I was thinking about not just Donne, but the professional activity, what we all do within at least the traditional domains of literary study, which I think is probably about 80% of the average English department these days. And I was thinking about the motivations for that kind of work, and discovering that there were these arguments that I was wanting to see made and nobody was making them. So I wrote a book that I wanted to read. And that helped. That helped me overcome the anxiety.
And I would say that I don't want to disillusion the audience, but that's often a difficult thing. I mean, people don't tend to do that. I think very often in the profession, or people write the book that, I mean, you have to be practical to some extent. I mean, somebody would say to you, for example, don't ever write on a single author, and certainly not Donne, who's everybody's written about for ages. Nobody reads books on poetry anyway. On top of that, But I guess what I'm saying is, so many people in the profession write the first book because that's the book. You need to write a certain kind of book. Then you get used to doing that. Then you write the second book, and then by then you pretty much are writing the books that you think you should write, and the book that you want to write on the weekends maybe won't ever get written. But you had the good fortune of deciding that you were going to actually publish the book that you would have written on the weekends anyway.
I've been very
and you survived.
Lucky. Yes, I've been very
brilliantly. Harvard University Press with these incredible blurbs.
Well, maybe it turned out that, and some of this has got nothing to do with any kind of foresight or terrific planning, but I think that some of the issues that I was wanting to address, it turns out that there were a lot of other people who were, who apparently there are more people than I realized who were feeling similarly about some of these issues, issues which it is extremely difficult not to talk about without oversimplifying them or getting bogged down in what feels like overly professional concerns. Another piece of this for me is that I really believe in the importance of what it is that we do. And I think that literary studies in general has been in the grip of a perpetual crisis of confidence ever since the beginning of the foundation of literary studies as a discipline, which is relatively recent. It's 100 or so years old. And it saw itself then, I think,
English studies.
As English, yes, English studies. And it saw itself precisely as an upstart discipline in comparison to classics or to philosophy or to history or to theology, disciplines with a much longer and well-established tradition within university systems. And that anxiety has always been there, that there's something, another reason that the discipline was, invented and developed, according to some histories at least, was to deal with the influx of women into the academy in a traditionally male-dominated province. And so this was seen as a kind of soft subject a soft subject suitable for women learners. Those kinds of deep institutional prejudices and biases continue, I think, to hang over our heads as we reach and strive for relevance. And I think within a Puritan culture, the experience of pleasure is difficult to justify on its own terms. But I am unembarrassed about the fact that one of the things that I maybe get people to do is think about gloriously impractical things. To think about what it might mean to be motivated by something other than the tax bracket that one is ultimately going to be in, to recognize that there may be more to human experience than staying within one's comfort zone. People worry a lot about the fact that no one reads literature anymore. It seems to me that large numbers of people never have, and that maybe more people are reading more difficult literature now than at any other time. They just happen to do it at school. And that's because more people are in school now than at any other period in human history. This reading that we do, this kind of book that I've written and the kind of poems that it's about, they're not easy reading. They're challenging. They're difficult. This isn't leisure time stuff. You can't read. I certainly wouldn't. I'm not sure if any. I wrote a book that I wanted to read, but I'm not sure if anyone else really does. And I certainly wouldn't recommend it as bedtime reading to anybody, unless you're having trouble sleeping, in which case it would probably have a powerful soporific effect.
I'm not sure about that, because you definitely write with wit and verve. You're having fun.
But the point is that I wouldn't recommend that the poetry that I'm interested in would necessarily make, a lot of it anyway, the most exciting bedtime reading or aeroplane reading or reading on the bus on the way to school. This is stuff that, while there are individual lines that may burn their way across your memory, Donne is a very, very challenging writer and knew that he was a challenging writer. And the experience of being textually challenged rather than simply offered a kind of escape is something that I think people can be instructed in, led to see the value of that experience, and that it doesn't have an immediate, it doesn't cash out in any immediate or obvious way. Certainly not in terms of political efficacy. I think that we can't even rectify political injustices within the academy. The treatment of graduate students or adjunct faculty, and isn't that a horrible formulation? Let alone alter the conditions of oppressed or working underpaid people in the environs outside the academy. I think it's pretentious to claim that that's what we can do. There may be unexpected knock-on effects in terms of the ways we turn people on, but our primary job is to arouse desire in open minds and then redirect them towards the library.
Well, how have your colleagues reacted to your view of criticism? I mean, not just here, but around. Do they think you're self-indulgent?
I think it's too. Some people have reacted that way. Yes, William Kerrigan told me that I was the most self-indulgent major critic that he'd ever.
Self-indulgent major critic. Well, that's pretty good. It's better than being a self-indulgent minor critic.
It was intended as a compliment.
Yes,
in a backhanded kind. And some people have said that to me. I think, again, part of the tragedy of the current conditions is that the book hasn't been out very long, and maybe it will have, maybe more people will like it. One always imagines, fantasizes about that kind of reception. But everyone is under such tremendous pressure to be constantly writing and publishing their own work right now that I'm impressed at anybody out there in this profession who actually has time for me. I think it's an enormous compliment when anyone reads this work within the narrow confines of Renaissance studies. If people from other disciplines are reading this work or from other areas of literary study, I'm enormously complimented by that. I can't believe they have found the time to do so. And I have met some people who, a modernist scholar at the University of Washington, Henry Stanton, who has been very complimentary about this work. And I'm bowled over by that kind of reception. It's wonderful. It's very exciting. It's very flattering. But really, again, I say early in the book, I actually think I say it in the acknowledgments, appreciation is not a dirty word in my critical vocabulary. And if what this book does is lead anyone who happens to pick it up to return to Donne or to any poet with a renewed interest in some of the questions of interpretation that I am circulating here, if they return to those primary texts and get something more out of them, then I have done my job. And I think that is another part of the function of criticism. Criticism doesn't exist to explain things. I think this is an easy error that novices in the discipline can fall into. It's a sort of a logic that somehow the function of criticism is to explicate. I don't buy that. I think the function of criticism is to make interesting things even more interesting. Mm-hmm. And that's the real purpose. If you can take, you're showing people why this thing is worth their time, mm-hmm. when they have so many other distractions, mm-hmm. so many other things to concern them. The young people that I teach, they have their own career anxieties to worry about. They don't even know if there's going to be a job for them when they leave this place. They're getting thousands of dollars in debt in order to come here without any guarantees of what the future will actually offer for them. They get countless messages and sources of distraction from all kinds of media. Some of those sources of distraction well worth their time. Wonderful movies, extraordinary TV shows, lots of extraordinary music. There's stuff out there for people. And with all of those combinations of both desirable activities and anxieties working on them and working on their time, if I can demonstrate that there's something deep and lasting and abiding in works of English literature that are 400 years old, then I have done my... And even Shakespeare needs this. The greatest writers in the tradition will always need this. The greatest contemporary writers will need this. Toni Morrison will need this in 100 years. And it would be a terrible shame if we somehow lost sight or needed more than that in order to justify what it is that we do. Mm-hmm. What we do is show people that maybe there are some things that abide, even when there's plenty to worry about or distract them in their own and present moment. Mm-hmm.
And they abide not in some realm free of human desire, but because they've evoked love
exactly.
and desire in the reader.
Because they deal with the difficult stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ben, it's been great talking with you.
Pleasure to talk to you too.
We look forward to the next occasion. And we've been speaking with Ben Saunders, a professor in the Department of English. Thank you for watching.